Hello, everyone. Today is June 9th, 2022, and thank you all for joining the first Price Formation Enhancement meeting. My name is Brenda Corona. We're here with the Stakeholder Affairs Group at the California ISO. Today, I'll be helping facilitate the meeting, and I'm kindly joined by James Paredes, Gabe Murtaugh, and our policy management team, John Gooden and Brad Cooper, to answer any questions you may have during the meeting. A few meeting reminders we have today is that our intent is to have a collaborative workshop in order to foster any open dialogue, share ideas, and explore different perspectives. So during the meeting, please raise your hand using the raise hand icon located above your chat window. This will let us know to unmute you as well as call on you. For those stakeholders who are going to speak today, we will ask for you to raise your hand and we'll unmute you at your time of your presentation. But before you ask any questions, please state your name and affiliation so we know who you are. All meetings such as this one is recorded, and the video file will be posted next week to the corresponding initiative webpage where we have available. And if you do have any questions, please send it through all panelists and we will be able to answer them. But other than that, I will go ahead and turn it over to James to go over the agenda for today's meeting.
Thanks, Brenda, and welcome everybody. This workshop is going to be unique in the sense that we solicited for stakeholders to provide presentations on the various topics that were outlined in the market notices that we feel would be appropriate for this initiative. So I'll start with just providing an overview of what those topics might be and some background on each of the topics, and then we will turn it over to a series of stakeholder presentations led by Jeff Spires from PowerX, Mark Smith from Calpine, Brian Bartholomew from Rev Renewables, and Callie Wells from Gridwell Consulting. Thank you so much for providing your presentations and agreeing to present for us today. During the stakeholder presentations, we'll allow each speaker their time to present their presentation, and then when the presenters are finished, we'll open it up for comments and questions, both from stakeholders and from the CAISO. So we really want it to be as collaborative as possible. Let's go to the next slide, please. Oh, just one other announcement. We had some stakeholders that submitted their slides in landscape and some that submitted them in portrait. We ended up converting them all to landscape. So I tried my best to make them as pretty as they came in. So apologize if they look a little different than how they did when you submitted them. But we are considering this sort of a kickoff to this initiative. Of course, this is not going to be the last opportunity for stakeholders to provide input into what ultimately becomes the scope of this initiative. We are before preceding an issue paper, which usually in our policy process is the way we kick off the policy development process. So we're even before that. So we are, sort of at an input collecting stage, wanting to hear feedback from stakeholders about, what issues the ISO should prioritize as it goes into the issue paper. But of course, like I said, when the issue paper is posted, we'll have an opportunity for stakeholders to provide comments to that. We'll have another stakeholder workshop as we typically do. So this is by no means the only place to provide input. Next slide, please. So here's, we're in very early stages of this initiative. So here are a couple dates that we think we're going to be able to stick to. We think that we'll have a issue paper posted after this workshop on the end of the month. We're aiming for June 30th with a stakeholder meeting approximately July 8th, and then stakeholder comments to the issue paper around August 12th. We are targeting to complete the policy in time to make a board presentation sometime in Q1 of 2023. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to go through the various elements in scope, and then once I'm finished, I will pause, and if anybody has any clarifying questions or comments for me or for the ISO team, feel free to ask those questions then. So here is the list of 5 plus a 6 catch-all item of scope items we may want to consider for this initiative. I have a slide or two for each of these, so I'm not going to get into them in detail on this slide, but generally speaking, the scope items include scarcity price enhancements, consideration of fast start pricing in the CAISO markets. 3 and 4 are related items to issues around the CAISO's multi-interval optimization in the real-time market and solutions to how we might be able to make pricing enhancements to accommodate resources like storage. Number 5 is an issue that carries over from the EDAM, in which we will, in this initiative, consider improvements to the local market power mitigation methodology for EDAM and potentially by extension into the Western EIM. And then of course, the 6th element, if there are price formation issues that are not covered under these umbrellas, we would like to hear from you what other issues we may want to prioritize, and we will consider them going forward. Let me actually pause here for a question in the queue. It may have been maybe a clarifying question. So let's take our first question.
Okay, unmuting Michael or Michelle.
Hey, this is Michelle Pito from the CPUC. I see these 6 elements, and I'm wondering if local market or local power mitigation also includes system power mitigation and system market power, and whether that's going to be within the scope, because I was always under the impression that, you know, whenever we discussed that, whenever you talked about scarcity pricing, you also said system market power mitigation would be considered as well. And it's not clear that this is in scope here.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm not the best person to speak to the differences between what was proposed in the old system market power mitigation initiative and what we're going to be considering here in this 5th element. If someone like Brad wants to chime in after I'm finished and connect those dots. Okay, go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, James, I can take that. Yes, what we want to consider under this item 5, Michelle, would address, it would include addressing BAA level mitigation in the CAISO BAA, which previously we were calling system market power mitigation, because we were looking at the CAISO BAA as the system we would be addressing. What we would like to consider is this grouping methodology among EIM BAAs, including the CAISO BAA, which would more accurately and appropriately address mitigation at the BAA level and or group of BAA levels. Currently today, there is no BAA level mitigation at the CAISO BAA. That's what we were developing and what we were calling system market power mitigation. But there is, as part of our existing local market power mitigation methodology, which I see, which is causing some confusion. Under our existing EIM local market power mitigation, we also assess competitiveness at the EIM BAA level, but we don't at the CAISO BAA level. So these changes would change the methodology and change to also assessing market power at the CAISO BAA level, depending on the conditions.
Okay, so maybe this would be more appropriately called improvements to market power mitigation, because when I think of local power mitigation, I think of it within the CAISO in locally constrained areas, and that's not what you're talking about here, is that right?
Yeah, we'll have to think about that. Yes, because what we call our EIM mitigation, which does assess at the BAA level, that's still referred to as the local market power mitigation that's in the EIM. So yeah, but I can see how that's confusing. We can think about how to better phrase that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Brad. Let's move to the next slide. Okay, so on the topic of scarcity pricing, essentially what we're going to be looking at is price formation during scarce system conditions. That's essentially what we mean when we're talking about scarcity pricing. We think that there are benefits to having accurate price formation during tight system conditions, some of them being to incentivize resource availability and performance, a better reflection of the value that consumers place on avoiding load shedding events. And there can even be, through looking at real-time scarcity pricing, can even be incentives that improve behavior for the day-ahead market, which could include more accurate load scheduling and virtual bidding behavior. So those are all things that all areas we think that can be improved upon by better scarcity pricing. And with the events of summers of 2020 and 2021, and some of the prices that were observed in the real-time market, we feel have emphasized our need to sort of review and enhance our scarcity pricing provisions. Let's move to the next slide. So this initiative will seek to build off some changes that we implemented in 2021 related to pricing during scarcity conditions. So two different stakeholder initiatives that made changes in this front, one of them being FERC Order 831, where it was implemented such that cost-justified bids can be submitted to the ISO up to $2,000. And then the highest cost-justified bid can set the power balance constraint penalty price under a certain threshold and under certain thresholds, and under some conditions, the real-time power balance constraint penalty price can rise up to $2,000. In the market enhancements for summer 2021 readiness, we made a few fairly limited but important improvements to scarcity pricing, or at least pricing during tight system conditions, the way resources are compensated. One of which being make-whole payments for hourly imports to the higher of their bid or the 15-minute market price during tight system conditions to ensure that hourly imports that offer during tight system conditions can at least be made whole since they're normally excluded from the bid cost recovery process. The second, that when the ISO operators are arming load, which is a term that describes when when load is used and replace, or load is used to replace contingency reserves that are dispatched for energy in tight system conditions, that the bid price of those reserves that are converted to energy and added to the supply stack are added in at the applicable bid cap. The third change being a change to RDRR resources, which is an acronym describing our emergency demand response resource fleet. Changes from the summer 2021 readiness initiative helped allow these resources to be included in the market pricing and dispatch to achieve more appropriate pricing. Question in the queue?
Yes, I will go ahead and unmute Michelle.
Hey, could you go back to slide 7 for just a second? So, I'm struggling with this scarcity pricing idea, and you said it incentivizes resource availability and performance. And so I guess I would just, in one of the recent FERC decisions in Danley's dissent, he said that resources have to make themselves available, and that withholding would be exercise of market power. So I I don't totally understand this idea of incentivizing resource availability. Can you explain that a little more? And then I have one more question.
Yeah, I think in terms of availability, I think it can be thought of as import offers into the ISO, where we've seen history of in the summer 2021 events where bilateral hub prices are way higher than the prevailing prices within the CAISO, which may not provide the conditions necessary for importers to want to offer in to the ISO. And then the performance part is more to resources that are already scheduled in the day-ahead market, where if scarcity prices were allowed to rise to higher levels in real time, increases the penalty, the financial penalty for resources that were scheduled in the day-ahead market, but then are not available or don't perform in the real-time market because they'll have to buy back those schedules at higher prices.
Right, but if we're talking about imports typically show up in the HASP, and there is no such penalty, right? I mean, it's 50 or 75% of the deviation.
No penalty for performance in HASP is what you're saying?
Right. So
or non-performance penalty for non-performance?
Yeah, this is Brad. Yeah, I wouldn't look at non-performance in HASP so narrowly. I think you're referring to the non-performance penalty, which presumably entities would not want to incur, and where real-time prices give incentives to those imports to not buy back schedules in HASP and be available to the ISO, and even for internal resources. Yes, I guess there are rules against physical withholding, but I don't think we can accomplish everything through administrative means, and incentives to improve performance, ranging from ramp rates or just to do maintenance that may be at the margin of whether it needs to be done or not. I think it's reasonable to assume that higher performance higher exposure to real-time prices, throughout the marketplace would incent a more reliable generation fleet.
But I'm going. Sorry. But going back to James's point that we're trying to incent the imports. If the imports are really coming in HASP, this doesn't do it, right? I just want to be clear.
I don't understand what you're saying. If imports are being scheduled in HASP in the real-time market, higher real-time market prices are going to incent more imports.
Right, but failure isn't tied. I mean, there's no sort of, in the day ahead, you have to buy back your schedule, but not HASP, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right?
Well, I don't want to get into the weeds right now. We're just at the issue stage. You're making some good points. You're making some points. Obviously, I don't necessarily agree with all those points, but I think you're certainly pointing out that there's different perspectives to the issues that we want to address.
So then I guess I just would make two more points. One of which is, it strikes me that part of this, if what we really want to do is incent performance, it seems to me that the import deviation penalties should be within scope. If we really want the imports to show up, then we should consider a higher penalty, right? I mean, if that's what we're after. I mean, I assume that's what we're after is performance. And if a large portion of the performance, as you guys indicate, is, imports not showing up, the whole T-40 issue, that seems to me really critical to be in scope. Unless that's not what we're after here.
Yeah, I think it's part of what we're after. I don't think it's the whole story, but I think that we will do our best to align the issues that you're talking about and make sure that they're harmonious. Because of course, yeah, if there aren't proper incentives in HASP for imports, then maybe scarcity pricing won't do what we hope it will do in terms of incentivizing more offers on the ties during tight system conditions. So yeah, I think that's part of how we'll have to look at it holistically.
Okay, great. So you guys will consider putting it in the scope then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks. And then the only other part I wanted to get at scarcity pricing is like, if you think about Texas and the high prices, the 10,000, how exactly did incentive high prices there sort of performance?
Yeah, it's a fair point, and there were some obvious failures there that we would have to, I think as part of the issue paper, maybe that's something that we're going to need to look at. It's certainly not a foolproof method. So maybe within the issue paper, we can look a little bit into that and provide some comment into why we think there are some obvious differences, but between our markets, but ultimately I think it would be good to incorporate lessons learned from those incidents and into what we ultimately propose.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. I saw a question in the chat from Ian White. Let me just read it out loud and I will answer. So with the enhancements made in 2021 for imports, I recall the trigger used the CAISO's old nomenclature of grid warning, stage 1, et cetera. Since the CAISO is aligning with the NERC standards, that is the EEA system, will these triggers align with the new nomenclature? So yes, the answer is yes. And under the new nomenclature, the HASP make whole provisions would apply at any EEA level above EEA watch. So an EEA watch can be issued in the day-ahead market by 3 p.m. But the HASP make whole provisions can also be triggered in real time through an EEA 1, 2, or 3. So I hope that answers the question. And then I'll read out Seth Cochran from DC Energy had a comment. Those Texas generators had to buy back the $9,000 prices. Seth Cochran is from DC Energy, and Ian White is from Shell. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so the second topic that we'll be considering within scope of this initiative is fast start pricing. So a little bit of history here. In 2016, FERC issued a NOPR that required each RTO and ISO to adopt market rules that meet certain requirements for pricing fast start resources. In response to the NOPR, the CAISO argued that the measures proposed in the NOPR ultimately would be unlikely to improve price formation in the CAISO's market. Part of the arguments was how the fast start pricing interacted with the CAISO's multi-interval optimization and its interaction with our flexible ramping product. Another thing that was discussed was that the CAISO at the time really didn't have many fast start resources within its footprint. And so, fast start pricing applied to the CAISO probably would have had anyway really limited difference, would have made a limited difference. Now that the ISO and regional entities are considering and exploring a broader regional market with more diverse resources with additional operational characteristics, the ISO believes it's appropriate to reassess its position regarding the need for fast start pricing. And just, I didn't have this on the slide, but just so we're clear, fast start pricing essentially considers two elements. One element is to, in the pricing run of, the run of the market that determines the market prices, to consider resources with really constrained dispatch ranges to be dispatchable from 0 to their PMIN or to their PMAX different ISOs implement it differently, but essentially allowed these resources that have a low dispatch range to, become marginal in the optimizations from the optimizations perspective, and thus set market prices where typically under the the locational marginal price mechanisms that we use today, it's almost either impossible or very difficult for resources with constrained dispatch ranges to set market prices because they're rarely, if ever, considered the marginal resource. The second component of BAUSTAR pricing is also a consideration of commitment costs and startup costs, other sorts of fixed costs that are in some ways amortized and added into the resources energy bid curve, such that it would incorporate those fixed costs directly into the setting of locational marginal prices. I'm just checking to see, okay, I don't see any questions or comments, okay. So moving on, so stakeholders in the past have expressed concerns regarding or price formation concerns that during critical periods, the pricing may preclude active participation. Sorry, was there a comment? Oh, maybe just an echo. May preclude active participation of energy storage resources in the real-time market. So some concerns have historically been raised about how the real-time market's multi-interval optimization dispatches storage resources and how it incorporates advisory prices in the real-time market's optimization horizon and dispatching resources. So one example could be that the real-time market can instruct a storage resource to charge uneconomically, uneconomically meaning the prevailing marginal prices are less than its offer, in anticipation of higher prices in future intervals. And then if those high prices do not materialize, then the storage resource occurs financial losses and potentially unnecessarily cycling. So stakeholders have suggested in the past that changes to the way that the optimization weights future market interval prices could reduce sub-optimal storage dispatches. For example, if there was heavier weight applied on earlier advisory price intervals than and less weight applied to intervals further in the future, that may reduce some of these issues. As part of this, also sort of another way of tackling this issue, stakeholders have also suggested that the ISO should re-examine its real-time bid cost recovery settlement. Energy storage resources don't have commitment costs and thus are not included within the bid cost recovery settlement that we have today, but arguably the way the bid cost recovery settlement works was designed around traditional generators, and maybe there's an opportunity to sort of reevaluate how some of these newer resource types fit into the bid cost recovery settlement. Let me address one question from the chat before I move to the next slide. So Dan Williams from CES asked, was that at or above? When I was referring to the HASP make-whole rule during tight system conditions, Dan Williams asked, was that at or above EEA watch or above EEA watch? And that was at or above EEA watch. So any EEA condition, that's EEA watch or higher. Hope that answers that. So next slide, please. Did I skip the slide? No, okay, this is the right slide. Okay, so then this slide relates to what we've already talked about, sort of transitioning away from EDAM, this consideration of we'll just call it market power mitigation. Maybe we'll avoid the word local for now. To more accurately assess transmission constraints between BAs. So some of the context here, in the Western EIM, the CAISO tests if the supply in an individual EIM BAA can meet demand competitively or provide counterflow or congested transmission constraints within the BAA. So it's on an individual BAA basis that this is done. In the EDAM straw proposal, the CAISO proposed to extend the Western EIM market power mitigation framework to EDAM as a starting point, and that framework being the BA level mitigation. However, there's possibility that we can approve this market power mitigation methodology by allowing for the grouping of BAAs together, where you can group together all the resources across multiple EDAM BAs that contribute to congestion relief, as opposed to testing individual BAs. Now, the reason why that, at least part of the reason why that got moved into this initiative is because although it is related to EDAM, whether or not we decide to implement a market power mitigation framework where we're grouping BAs should ultimately be harmonized with the Western EIM market power mitigation framework. So we would want the methodologies to be harmonious between EDAM and the Western EIM. And so implementing a grouping methodology in EDAM we should necessarily consider implementing the same type of framework in the Western EIM. And so we will consider that in this initiative. Next slide, please. And of course, as I mentioned in the beginning, those topics are, our best, what we think the major topics will be, but we are wanting to hear feedback about, one, how the ISO should prioritize these issues as it moves forward. Two, if there are price formation issues that are not really relevant under the umbrellas of the topics that I had just previously mentioned, we are interested in that feedback from participants as we ultimately move into the issue paper, where we can sort of propose a scope to stakeholders. So,
well, hey James, this is Brad. I just wanted to jump in and make one clarification. It's that the storage doesn't use commitment costs, and so they don't get bid cost recovery. I think what you meant was they don't get bid cost recovery for commitment costs, but they do get bid cost recovery on their energy bids.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's multiple reasons why. Yeah, thank you. I'll leave it at that. Okay, I think that was my last slide, and I don't see any other questions or comments in the chat. One just popped. Yeah, one just popped up.
It looks like that hand was lowered. Tong, if you did have a question, please raise your hand again. Okay.
Oh. Hi, can you hear me? Oh.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know whether these questions belong to this forum. Specifically for this is Tom Wu from WAPA. Yeah, there is a IBAA pricing. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. With the EDAM, I don't know whether you should remove that IBAA pricing. At that time, when IBAA pricing was designed, ISO did not have visibility to IBAA, those areas. But now with the EDAM, EIM, especially the EDAM, should that be revisited? My second question is related to loss treatment in other BAAs. I know that with the IBAA and there's special loss treatment in the LMP loss component. With the EDAM expansion to more BAs, this problem is not just limited to WAPA sub-BA. It may apply to other BAs as well. Transmission providers would collect losses, or system operators, BA operators would collect losses in their BA. But then with LMP, the loss component, the loss would be collected again. How to reconcile this? Those are two questions I have.
Thanks, Tom. And just to clarify, the term IBAA, I'm not familiar with that term. What is that? Is anyone else familiar with that term? And if not, Tom, maybe you could explain what that stands for.
I think that's an acronym for Embedded Balancing Authority Area. For example, bank is IBAA.
Okay.
Let us say a BPA is a BA, but that's not IBAA. Now, bank is a BA, but the bank is IBAA. It's because geographic location. So the ISO considers this IBAA part of the ISO's footprint, but it's a separate BA. There are special treatments in terms of pricing and loss component.
Yeah, I don't have any comment off the bat. It's not something that has been brought up so far. We can, why don't you allow us to think about it, and I'll get together with George and others to discuss this item and see if it's appropriate that we include that in the issue paper.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay, we have another question here from Alba.
Good morning, James. This is Alva Svoboda from PG&E. It just occurred to me one other issue that has been in scope in the past that might be appropriate to consider here is market power mitigation, essentially market power mitigation on the demand side. It was as applied to charging bids on batteries, but I guess it has wider application. So that would be another thing to at least consider here because it has been discussed in the past. I'm not a fan of it, but I think it's in scope.
Okay. Thanks, Alva.
Okay, it looks like that's all for now.
Did have a lot of questions, but I'm not sure if they're back up. Lindsay?
Oh, I see. Yes, I
Okay,
see them. Thank you.
Let's go ahead and try again. If they do have questions, we can ask. Or if they can wait. Go ahead,
Hi, this is Lindsay. Okay, thanks. This is Lindsay Schleckway from NV Energy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I was wondering, in terms of scarcity pricing, are you at all going to consider stepped constraints or the stepped scarcity pricing?
Yeah, so I can't necessarily comment on scope items more specific than just to generally describe what we'd be looking at. But when you're talking about stepped constraints, are you talking about something along the lines of like an operating reserve demand curve or some other function like that?
Yeah, maybe something like that. But just in general, for smaller infeasibilities, if they would have kind of, I don't know, they'd start off at a lower scarcity price for relaxation, and then it would just increase based off of, I guess, the increasing megawatts amount that the infeasibility grows to. I think other markets have something like this. So I was just wondering if that was going to be part of the scope.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we're going to be at least considering, and we would, you know, the issue paper that's coming out will be our opportunity to sort of list out some of these types of items, more specific than just the umbrella scope items that I'm presenting here, that we would propose to consider as we move towards a straw proposal. And I think that item would definitely be one that we would consider. Generally speaking, probably looking at the way that we structure our ancillary service scarcity pricing, and how that interacts with energy prices will almost certainly be a part of that. Looking into how other ISOs use operating reserve demand curves, which, like you said, are used in other markets, how we might be able to implement and whether that's appropriate, I would think would almost certainly be part of the scope. So I think the general answer to your question is yes, but we'll defer, like, ultimately sort of the things that we look out for both the issue paper and the proposal.
Hey, James, this is Brad. I just want to add that I think one thing that we've talked about being in scope is looking at the FRP maximum penalty price, because, you know, and this is in coordination with, you know, in the DAME initiative, we're looking at our well, I'm forgetting our term, our graduated penalty prices for procuring imbalance reserves, which, you know, gets at the same thing that Lindsay was talking about with step constraints. And, you know, we're planning our nodal FRP improvements this fall, and the nodal FRP improvements would make FRP in the real-time market work together better with energy to provide a better scarcity prices. And one thing, you know, we've discussed, I don't remember if we put this out there yet, but we've discussed internally is looking at the FRP penalty prices, you know, potentially raising them from the current max of 247. And, you know, those changes would work together with energy pricing to provide, you know, that what was called, you know, the step constraint approach, or it's not, they're not exactly the same thing as operational reserve demand curves as other ISOs have put in, but it's accomplishing, or would accomplish, much of the same thing. And then I would note that more elaborate scarcity pricing mechanisms that require real-time reoptimization of ancillary services with energy in the real-time market will need to be a longer-term thing, and probably something we would need to address in a subsequent phase of this initiative, or in, you know, on our roadmap, we have the ancillary services real-time reoptimization initiative. I forget exactly where that is. I think it might be 2024. You know, that's a complicated issue, because to be operationally confident in ancillary services real-time optimization, we would want to have ancillary services more locational, which is a complicated issue. So I just wanted to add that.
Okay, this is very helpful. Thank you.
I've got 2 chat questions I want to address, and then another hand just popped up. Actually, three chat questions. So Roger Kwan from LA states that they have ongoing workflows with the ISO regarding bidding in pump storage. Do these changes fall within the scope of how it will impact prices? I have written it down as a note to make sure that we consider this. It's not something that to date that I've thought about or that the team's thought about, but we can see if it's appropriate to consider how pump storage bids fall within price formation. Then Dan Williams from Customized Energy Solutions asked if the CAISO is considering bringing CCW Phase 2 into this initiative, in particular, market-based bidding of commitment costs. I'll defer to Brad how that might play in. I think just a quick comment though that I think it's an interesting thought, maybe in parallel with fast start pricing if we're considering commitment costs being part of locational marginal prices somehow. But Brad, do you have any thought?
Just an initial thought, because we hadn't thought about that. My inclination is that we wouldn't. You know, we just finished that, or I guess we didn't just finish it now, but it feels like it. We spent a long time on the CCW, and you know, I believe we arrived at our current approach as a I don't want to say compromise, but it's a middle ground approach that that would provide sufficient flexibility to bidding commitment costs while protecting against market power in commitment costs, because to implement the unrestricted bidding of commitment costs, we would have to implement the commitment cost market power mitigation, which is complicated and both makes suppliers unhappy when they get mitigated, and it had the potential to lead to inflated costs to the event that failed to mitigate. And I think the approach that we landed on was struck a balance between those two that seems like with all the other stuff we need to do in this initiative, it's not worth opening up that can of worms again.
Thanks, Brad. I'm going to try to get through as many of these questions, but I'm going to cut it off at 10. If we can't get through them by 10 o'clock, we'll cut it off, and then we'll save the questions for the end. A couple more chat questions, but let's go to the phone for Leah Fisher, who has her hand up.
Hi, this is Leah Fisher with Public Generating Pool. Going back to the market power mitigation grouping concept, I think it would be helpful to have a little bit more discussion on the intent behind this proposal in order to be able to weigh in effectively on whether it should be in scope. And I think what I've heard, maybe it was in the EDAM initiative, but I think the idea is that this could possibly reduce mitigation in EDAM. But I guess what I'm struggling with, and my sort of knowledge on the three pivotal supplier test is probably a little bit rusty here, but in thinking about the grouping concept, wouldn't you potentially have less suppliers to test against if you're grouping entities together, which would make failing the three pivotal supplier test more likely, and then all else equal would probably lead to increased mitigation? So I'm just wondering, do you follow that logic? Does that possibility make sense? And then if so, would the three pivotal supplier test need to somehow be modified under this new grouping concept?
Yeah, great question.
This is Brad. I can take that. The issue is that the current EIM mitigation test applies the three pivotal supplier test individually to an EIM BAA, where you're going to have less suppliers and you're likely to have three pivotal suppliers. You know, if you just look at the supply in an individual BAA level, you're more likely to fail the three pivotal supplier test than looking at over a larger area, i.e. a group of BAAs where you would have more suppliers.
Okay, I think I'm still struggling with that a little bit, because if you have a big group, but then you have to have others to test against, do you not have sort of enough entities to test against in that three pivotal supplier test if you're doing a grouping? I guess that's my question.
Sorry, I was in mute. And maybe as part of our issue paper, we can present some examples of this, but no, you have more suppliers in a bigger group, so you're less likely to have to mitigate by failing the 3 pivotal supplier test.
Okay. Yeah, I'm probably still just needing some examples to help me think this through. So yeah, I think that would be helpful. Appreciate that.
Yeah, we plan on providing more detail and examples about, the concept in our issue paper coming out. So hopefully those will be helpful. Drew Gray asks, and I apologize, I don't know Drew's affiliation, but is there a plan to have the real-time market co-optimize the entire energy and ancillary service stack instead of relying on day-ahead ancillary services being a physical obligation? The answer is yes, but likely not in this initiative. I think that's a longer-term issue that we'll hope to address, specifically the re-optimization of ancillary services in real time. So that may be more of a longer-term issue. And then Ian White from Shell asks or comments, in order to inform this initiative, would the CAISO be opposed to calculating and estimating of the value of unserved load? I think the answer is yes, and I think if we're looking into sort of an operational reserve demand curve approach, I think it's natural to, as other ISOs have done, to look into an approach that establishes those prices based on some calculated level of unserved load. How we particularly do that, we'll address within the proposals, but how or if, I guess, but it's definitely something that would be considered. So I hope that helps. Drew Gray is from EDF Renewables. Okay, I think that's it for questions. So I'll turn it back over to Brenda, who can introduce our first of 4 speakers.
Thank you, James. So hopefully you guys can hear me. For today's meeting, we will go ahead and have Jeff Spires speak first, and then from there we'll have the following individuals for stakeholders. But now that we have Jeff Spires raise hand, Marvin, can you please unmute his line to check it's okay? Jeff, can we test your audio really quick?
Hi, Brenda, it's Jeff here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Take it away.
Great. Well, thank you, and thanks, James. I appreciate the opportunity to present today, and I also am looking forward to hearing from the other presenters today on these topics. So thank you for holding the workshop and allowing us to present today. My presentation is focused on one issue in particular that we've had an interest in quite some time related to price formation, which is fast start pricing. If you can move to the first slide, please. So before I get into the details of fast start pricing, I just wanted to start with, at a higher level, what we believe are important objectives for accurate price formation. And really starting with accurate prices are needed to ensure that on an aggregate basis, the region is getting the maximum benefits. And it falls into a number of categories. From an efficiency point of view, encouraging both the installation and ultimately the use of the lowest cost resources to meet the needs of that footprint and achieve aggregate savings at a societal level. Accurate prices are also important from a reliability point of view because, and some of this has already come up today, that contributes towards encouraging resources to be built and to be made available both when and where they're needed the most. And lastly, from an environmental perspective, accurate pricing is really important to promote the introduction of clean and non-emitting resources, new technologies like storage, to find the best fit of resources to not only meet the needs of the grid reliably and efficiently, but also to meet the growing environmental goals that many of us are pursuing. Another really important category that requires accurate prices above and beyond the aggregate efficiency gains I was just talking about is accurate prices are also needed from an individual point of view, whether that's participants, BAs, subregions within a market. Having accurate prices is necessary for all of those entities to benefit from participation as we're looking towards a regional organized market and expanding upon that, looking at EDAM, et cetera. And really what it comes down to is if you have inaccurately high market prices, that harms the ratepayers of those entities that tend to be net purchasers in those hours because they're paying more for energy than they should be. But conversely, the flip side of that is that inaccurately low market prices harm ratepayers of the entities that tend to be net sellers in those hours and use that revenue to lower the rates for their ratepayers in their areas. So in our view, what we're really striving for is accuracy in pricing. And you can see that there are several that in our minds are important, and we've heard of some others today that are I'm also looking forward to hearing more about. But in our mind, some of the key topics include fast start pricing, which I'll be talking about today, scarcity pricing, as we've already gotten into somewhat earlier, market power mitigation, and GHG pricing, which may not be something in this forum directly, but it's certainly a discussion we've been having in the context of the EDAM in recent months. And all of these elements are contributing and have a role to play to get to accurate prices for the market. Next slide, please. So now I have two slides, and these are both related to fast start pricing. I wanted to start with some background to add to some of what James already said early on. And I think it's probably the best to start with the bilateral markets because it's an intuitive way to describe this issue. In the bilateral markets, parties negotiate the price that they're going to transact at. And that means that they reflect all of their short-term costs in that decision. And that includes the cost of starting and operating thermals, including fast start resources, and or the cost of avoiding those, the avoided costs of running those resources as a purchaser. So just to give you an example, a seller that has to run a $70 peaker is not going to make a transaction unless they can recover $70 to justify running that facility. A purchaser, on the other hand, that's looking at whether or not there's an opportunity to buy market energy rather than run their peaker will say, my choice is to purchase market energy or run a $70 peaker. So their willingness to purchase market energy would be up to that $70 level. So what you're going to find is naturally through a bilateral trading environment, fast start resources are incorporated into the price, and the market prices in that example I gave will approximate that $70 level, reflecting the value of that marginal resource. Now, that's really different from historically what has gone on in organized markets. Historically, organized market design has not included peakers, gas peakers in the price. And the reason is, as James mentioned before, the reason is that under the organized market design, typically the market price is set based on the next incremental megawatt of demand. And gas peakers tend to be operated at their full output. In general, they're pretty typically block loaded. Once the decision is made to bring them online, they are, say, dispatched at 50 megawatts. And so the nature of the market algorithm historically would mean that those resources are actually ineligible to set the market price. And this was an issue that was identified by some markets, in particular MISO and the New York ISO started recognizing that this created an issue where gas peakers are running, but they're not making it into the market price. And that's detrimental to getting an accurate price that really reflects what resources are being used to meet load. And so they began to look at ways to change the market design and find methodologies to try to bring those resources into the price to get a better outcome from a price formation perspective. And that led to, in 2016, FERC issuing a NOPR that proposed to require all organized markets to include these peakers in the calculation of the price through this approach called fast start pricing. And the quote that you can see in blue was from FERC at the time. And the concern they had is that by not reflecting fast start prices, fast start resources in the price, those RTO ISOs are failing to accurately reflect the marginal cost of serving load because those resources are inappropriately prevented from setting price. And at the time, as James also mentioned, CAISO and DMM opposed the NOPR for a variety of reasons. But of course, we are happy to be here to talk about this today, and glad to hear that the CAISO's reconsidering its position on this topic now. FERC eventually terminated that NOPR, but instead opened proceedings that required SPP, the New York ISO, and PJM to adopt fast start pricing. And DMM intervened in those proceedings, opposing fast start pricing at a conceptual level. But ultimately, FERC disagreed with DMM and was clear in their view that that these fast start resources are being used in real time. The decision to run those resources to meet load is a marginal cost that should be included in prices. So fast forward to 22, where are we now? All bilateral markets and all FERC jurisdictional organized markets, except for those that are operated by the CAISO, so the CAISO markets itself and the EIM, all other markets have implemented fast start pricing, and all other markets include the cost of gas peakers in the calculation of prices. And so in our view, CAISO's market design is an outlier and is out of step with FERC policy on this and what ultimately the best practices are that are being implemented or have been implemented in the other markets. And this is something that we really wanted to know more about. We had a strong sense that this was an important issue, but we wanted to dive into it more carefully and find a thorough assessment of this issue and understand more about the potential magnitude of it. And others had an interest in this as well. And so PowerX and the Public Power Council, PPC, asked Energy GPS to do a detailed analysis to understand what are the implications of excluding peakers from the price in Western markets. Many of you probably know Energy GPS. They are broadly known across the West as being a sophisticated and very technical analytics shop, and they do a lot of work for various entities, and they have a lot of experience in markets. And so we asked Energy GPS to look into this, and they took on the task of doing an extensive analysis. They spent considerable effort over the course of about a year in order to do a robust empirical analysis using real world data on an hour by hour basis to try to understand better the implications of fast start pricing. And Energy GPS's what they did was they looked at gas peakers across the West, in the Northwest, in the Southwest, in California. The only region that they didn't include in their analysis was the Rockies. They looked over a 4-year time frame from 2017 to 2020. They collected hour by hour data for well over 100 peakers across those regions, using EPA data that included the amount of gas that these resources are burning on an hourly basis, the megawatt hour production coming from these gas peakers on an hour by hour basis. They incorporated gas prices, transportation rates, GHG emissions, variable O&M charges, et cetera, associated with these resources, compiled this data so that then they could look at that and answer the question of how often do these peakers run, in what regions are they running, what seasons, what hours, and what are the costs when these resources are starting up and running in those hours. And once they had that information, they could compare those results to the actual market prices in the CAISO and in the EIM to understand, do the market prices in those CAISO markets reflect the cost of starting and operating those gas peakers? And if not, how much higher would the market prices have to be, or how much higher would those prices be if those peakers were not excluded and they were eligible to set price in those hours? Next slide, please. So this is, I'll walk through this slowly, but at a high level, first of all, Energy GPS's conclusions were that peakers are used extensively across the West, particularly in California and the Southwest. Peakers are running year-round in the evening peak hours. They also saw that peakers run frequently in the morning peaks in the winter in particular. And so overall, somewhere between 40 and 50% of the hours of the year, peakers are running in California and in the Southwest. And in those critical hours, particularly in the evening peak, there are often 20 or more peakers running. So this is not one or two here and there. This is many peakers running. These resources are clearly needed to meet load in those hours. The second high-level conclusion is that the impact on market prices was significant in those hours when peakers are running. And the high-level determination is that the impact of excluding peakers from the prices is significant and has numerous consequences as a result. So the first bullet on the slide is that excluding gas peakers from the price results in inter and intra-regional cost shifts. And so the analysis included evaluating the impact on regional trade. And the first finding was that a lack of fast start pricing increases retail rates in the Northwest by lowering the compensation for sales to the CAISO BA by $93 million to $185 million a year during the study period. Likewise, in the Southwest, it resulted in lower compensation for sales to the CAISO BA between $95 million and $235 million a year. And the reason that this is harmful to the ratepayers in those other regions is that those other regions are generally exporting to the CAISO BA in the same hours that gas peakers are running extensively. And so those reduced prices for the entities in the Northwest and the Southwest ultimately impact their rates because the entities in those other regions are using that revenue from their surplus sales in those peak hours to reduce their own retail rates. Energy GPS also estimated the magnitude of the issue in terms of overall CAISO load. And so, as an organized market, the load in the CAISO BA is financially settled as a purchase at the wholesale price through the market. And so Energy GPS determined that excluding peakers translated into lower wholesale energy costs for load in the CAISO BA between $900 million and $1.8 billion, depending on the year. Now, it's important to note that in practice, the net cost savings to California LSEs would likely be less than the value that Energy GPS calculated, because some load serving entities are also going to own generation as well. So the generation would benefit from the higher market price and reduce the overall savings to the LSE in some cases. But that said, a significant share of the load in the CAISO BA is served by wholesale purchases, either from merchant generation within the BA or from importers. And so this analysis certainly indicates that the magnitude of the savings for the load in the CAISO BA is considerable. And when we look forward, it's likely that these impacts will grow as we see higher gas prices and a higher carbon price, which leads me to the next bullet, which is this issue also has the effect of undermining carbon pricing programs, because if you exclude a peaker from the price, you're also excluding the emissions from the price. And so these higher emitting resources that are necessary to meet load in the peak hours also, when they're excluded from the market price, have the effect of suppressing the incentive for clean resources to displace those. And that's another really important issue that stems from not having the right price signal when these types of emitting resources are being run. And of course, the secondary result of market prices that don't accurately reflect these resources when they're being used is it results in discriminatory side payments to thermal resources that receive payments outside of the market, but at the same time, the resources that are selling within the market don't receive that additional payment. After Energy GPS completed its analysis, PowerX also used the results of that to think about other impacts and other consequences of excluding peakers from market prices. And one of the key points is excluding peakers really does suppress the price signal to install and make available resources that are better than gas peakers, could more efficiently displace those, provide economic benefits, provide environmental benefits, etc. And an example of that is we looked at a hypothetical 4-hour battery, which participating in the market would of course charge during the lower value hours and discharge during those peak hours, which are the same hours that peakers are running and the same hours that we see the price impact of excluding those in market prices. The impact of not including peakers in the price would reduce the market compensation for a 4-hour battery by $15 a megawatt hour, or 34%. And so clearly that is a lack of a price signal that very well could make the difference in the business case when a battery is looking at whether, when a developer is trying to identify whether or not a battery should be developed and brought online. That is a very significant impact that directly negatively impacts those types of new technologies when they're evaluating their feasibility to participate in the market. Likewise, even looking at a wind resource that doesn't have the same capability to shape its supply, but it certainly produces output during some of these hours when peakers are running. So even wind resources are harmed by not receiving an accurate price by 9% based on the analysis we did looking at the historical data. The last element that we looked at was trying to understand what the impacts might be in the EIM. And our perspective or our results there was, again, a material impact where excluding peakers in the EIM has the effect of shifting value of EIM transfers from Northwest and Southwest entities to the CAISO BA. And you can see the chart on the right that estimated that impact using 2020 transfers. The annual impact for the CAISO was a benefit of approximately $23 million. And in large part, the remaining entities had varying degrees of losses associated with their participation. And the reason that that occurs is that in the EIM, for the most part, during those peak hours when this is an issue, the CAISO BA is an importer and the other BAs are net exporters. Now, the degree of impact in the EIM is limited, both by the size of the EIM itself and by the level of participation of the individual entities within the market. And so you can see in the chart on the right side that some of the participants have relatively limited participation in the EIM, and that's part of why their impacts may be lower than others. But the key point, of course, is that the impacts to participants of inaccurate prices would be much greater in a day-ahead market that did not have fast start pricing, where there is a much larger volume of transactions. So, in conclusion, we believe that market prices that don't reflect the cost of using gas peakers negatively impacts the overall efficiency of the market from an aggregate point of view. It doesn't provide the right incentives for existing resources to show up in the right place and at the right time. It creates side payments, discourages investment in new technologies like batteries, and it undermines carbon pricing programs. Those are all significant challenges. It also creates significant cost shifts between buyers and sellers and between regions. And so as we're looking ahead here, we think this is one of the key areas that should be explored and addressed. And so again, we appreciate the CAISO having this discussion, having this workshop and this initiative, and also expressing a willingness to continue to discuss fast start pricing, because we believe this is a critical topic to ensure market prices are accurate, and we're looking forward to the discussion going forward. So that's all I had, and I'm happy to take questions or feedback.
Thanks, Jeff. And thanks again for stepping up to the plate and providing your perspective. And we really appreciate the time that you took, to prepare this presentation. So thank you so much. I just had two clarifying questions, and then I'll turn it over. We'll have some time for other stakeholders to respond and ask questions. First, are the energy GPS study results publicly available? And if they're not, could they be made publicly available for the benefit of all of us here on the call, and especially as we're trying to prepare for the issue paper and straw proposals? This type of information seems valuable to consider. So that's first thought.
Thanks, James. Yes, we are hoping to do that shortly, and we may make the analysis available on our website. We're just working through how to do that, but I recognize that more information would be valuable for furthering the discussion, and so we will get back to you on that shortly.
Sounds great. And then I just want to clarify the numbers on the slide. So the difference between the figure on the lower right, which is the estimated annual impact from EIM participation in the year 2020, from the numbers in the upper half of the slide, which are a lot greater. I'm assuming the difference between the two numbers is intended to reflect participation on the ties, or from resources on the ties of the CAISO that are not participating in EIM, or what is the difference between the numbers in the lower right and then the numbers in the upper half of the slide?
Thanks for the question. That's a great clarification. The bottom chart is just looking at the EIM, incremental activity within the EIM. The top values are based on all regional transfers to the CAISO from the Northwest and the Southwest. So that would include day ahead and real time deliveries. So the volume of transactions underlying the numbers at the top are therefore considerably larger than the bottom that's just focused on EIM.
Thanks. So we do have 3 other presenters. So in fairness of time, I'm going to cut off the questioning at 10:30 so that each presenter is allotted 30 minutes to present and to respond to questions. So we'll go ahead and start on the phone, and then we'll stop at 10:30.
Okay, we're taking the first question.
Hey, this is Michelle Kita from the CPUC. Just a couple of comments and questions. So the first is, you indicate that it would send the right price signal to build battery storage, but most of the battery storage that's being built in California is under long-term contract. So these prices wouldn't necessarily have any effect on that. Is that right?
Thanks, Michelle. I mean, I can't speak to the nature of long-term contracts, but I would say that fundamentally having an accurate wholesale energy price contributes to the right incentives as resources are looking ahead to say, are they economically viable or not? And I think that's a pretty general principle around seeking accurate prices through wholesale markets so that you have transparency and clarity about what the value of resources is and what the cost of meeting load is.
Right,
and that,
but
so
most folks aren't buying or aren't, I mean, I don't know of it, you know, power plants that have built on spec. All of them are under long-term contract as far as I know. Likewise, with regard to wind contracts, most of them sell their output, right? Like for renewable energy. So they would have a long-term contract for their offtake, right? So they wouldn't build on spec to make money in this market. Is that right?
I can't speak to what individual decisions make, but what I would say, or what individual entities do and how they decide, but what I would say is short-term prices also play a role in the pricing for forward contracting too. I mean, ultimately, entities that are entering into longer-term transactions are looking at what their expectations are about day-ahead and real-time prices in their consideration of the value that they're either willing to pay or receive as part of a longer term contract. So I just think that fundamentally these short-term price signals are critical to encouraging the right resources to be made available to the market, including on a longer term basis.
Okay, or they might say how much they cost and then put a markup on them and maybe not have, I mean, given the uncertainty regarding long-term prices, right? I mean, like right now, the long-term prices might look really hard because of gas, but you can't be certain of that. Okay, so I just want to move on to something else. So I think what you're saying here is that it's not that the Northwest and Southwest are losing money. You're just saying under your fast start pricing model, they would make more money. Is that right?
What we're saying is that relative to a price that accurately reflects the marginal resources that are necessary to meet load, a price that is below that accurate level has a negative consequence on the entities that are selling. And these are the values that we're calculating that are impacted by what we believe to be a price that is lower than it should be when these types of resources are running and are marginal.
Okay. And so from California's perspective, what you're saying that is if we implement this kind of fast start pricing, California customers will pay $1.8 billion more. Is that right?
What I was trying to say, and I hope it was clear, what I was trying to say was the wholesale energy cost in the CAISO BA was lower by somewhere between 900 million and 1.8 billion by comparing the overall load in the BA to the price difference that we see with and without fast start pricing. But as I mentioned before, the overall cost savings to LSEs are going to depend upon the nature of their portfolios and what resources they have that may also be benefiting from those prices in those hours. So I can't speak to definitively what that would mean on a net basis for specific entities.
Okay, but if there's a separation between the generators and load in California, it could be up to $1.8 billion that you're talking about here. Okay, so,
Yes.
so moving on, if fast start pricing is integral to EDAM, moving forward, it doesn't look like EDAM is in California's interest if they're going to be paying $1.8 billion more. Is that right?
I don't think I can answer that. I think that the question, what we view this as is we want to see accurate prices. We think that that plays a role in all participants, whether they're in California or outside of it, in determining what they see as the costs and benefits of any market. But even outside of EDAM, I think, setting aside EDAM or expanding markets, I think the issue here is, do the market prices as they're currently calculated accurately reflect the marginal cost of meeting load or not?
Okay. And when you talk about accurate prices, I mean, what's the limit? Like Texas has $10,000 prices. Would you call those accurate?
This is not focused on scarcity pricing. This is when resources are running and they're marginal, and whether or not the price accurately reflects that. And so, scarcity pricing is a challenging discussion because, as you're alluding to, it's an administrative price where the prices are set at some agreed upon level when system conditions are tight. But this is very different because this is just during a typical hour. Resources are running, they're being extensively used, but they're not making it into the market price because of a lack of a technical solution that's needed to make that happen. So in this case, we're really talking about the incremental costs of starting and running these resources, which is occurring regularly in those peak hours.
Okay. Let's see. So I guess I'm a little confused. So California could potentially pay up to $1.8 billion more, but we're undertaking this entire exercise to make imports available, but they're already available, but you're just saying, I mean, I'm confused. Like, why are we doing this if they're participating willingly, right, in this market? I'm confused. I mean, they don't, right?
I don't think I have an answer to that. I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question, to be honest.
I think what we're going to have to do is in the issue paper, we're going to have to sort of read, outline what fast start pricing is intended for. I think we'll have some examples to get on the same page about what it is and what it's intended for. So we'll look at that in the issue paper.
Okay.
If you have any more, I just asked that this be the last question so that we can try to get one more person in, and then we'll move on.
Okay, but just to be clear, fast start pricing will increase the prices throughout California, right? And if you're a net buyer, it will potentially increase by up to $1.8 billion. That's the essence of what I see here. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I also think it'll be important to review the study to understand what assumptions are made and other things so that we can all come to a consensus about what the impacts will be. Let's do one more question, and then if there's time, I wrote down the other hands in queue, and if there's time, we can revisit some questions. But let's take one more caller.
Okay, Joshua.
Yes, good morning. Josh Arnold from PG&E. Can you hear me, James?
Yes.
Great, thanks. Jeff, very quick question on these numbers. In the study that was performed, were you looking only at LMPs, or did you include bid cost recovery payments as well in those impact values?
Thanks, Josh. That's a great question. These are only related to market costs, so they do not include bid cost recovery payments. So to the extent that bid cost recovery was lower because you had a market price that covered the cost of these resources. That's not incorporated in these summary results.
Okay, that does seem to be a bit of a lack, but I look forward to looking at the study. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. And like I said, I've written down the name of other. Oops, sorry, I accidentally muted myself. I wrote down the names of the other questions in queue, and we'll make sure that if there's time at the end, we can get back to those questions. So let's bring up our next speaker. Mark Smith, there you go.
Hey, James. Sound check, can you hear me? Good,
Loud and
thank
clear.
you. Awesome. Let me just start by saying the ISO has some pretty tough choices to make. I mean, there's a lot of compelling issues that have come up already in this discussion. You know, I'm focused today on some of the scarcity pricing issues narrowly that have been described. It's Calpine's belief that the entire market, the loads, the resources, the external partners, they'll all benefit with more efficient pricing when supplies become tight. Loads will schedule in the forward markets and they'll leverage whatever elasticity they have, including their demand response programs. Resources will position themselves for stress conditions. And ISO operators will have more confidence that the markets will bring what they need to ensure reliability. We hope that these benefits are both compelling and sufficient for the ISO to prioritize scarcity pricing in this initiative. In the next few minutes, I hope to cover some observations about pricing in the ISO market, set some principles for the design of an efficient scarcity pricing proposal, and maybe sow some seeds of proposals that need to be vetted and can be vetted by all of us as a stakeholder community. But first, let me express some appreciation and gratitude to GDS Associates for helping Calpine think through these issues. Perry Servideo and Don Trethaway, along with others over there, collaborated with us to produce a paper on scarcity pricing that actually we've shared with some of you. And James, I thought there would be comments right after this set of workshops. I'm wondering, and I'll ask that the ISO post that paper, you know, along with my presentation here, so that all participants can see the paper. The paper, you know, could be considered an issue paper. It addresses the current environment, what we saw during tight conditions in the past year, make some observations about some of the issues that arose as a result of that, and then make some recommendations. I'll cover all of those at a very high level, but the paper goes into those at great depth. In conceiving that paper, we sought to take a soft touch approach to the market models, to the optimization engines. You know, we hope that there would be a few bolt-on proposals or mechanisms that avoid the substantial revisions to the optimization engines of specifically the real-time markets. This kind of stems from our experience with FRP, which we think is an incredibly valuable and important enhancement to the ISO markets, and hopefully will be implemented this fall. I'm intrigued by Brad's comments that we could change the steps in that demand curve to make it a more effective scarcity mechanism. I'll have to think about that a little bit more. And we've recently run into issues also with DAME. I will say that we were only moderately successful with this aspiration to keep things simple and use a soft touch. So this is the right slide, thank you, at this point. Our focus has been on the real-time markets, the FMM and real-time dispatch markets, where we really tend to see some unexpected prices during tight conditions. And what I mean by unexpected conditions were highlighted by Dr. Harvey. You see at the bottom of this, there's a link to Dr. Harvey's presentation on scarcity pricing, where he looked back to the 20 and 21 events and made some conclusions. And he also, of course, observed the scarcity pricing proposals of other ISOs and RTOs. But I think what he observed in those papers and in the discussion was that prior to and after mandatory demand curtailments, prices were unexpectedly low, and they moved rather discontinuously when the curtailments actually occurred. And what I mean by discontinuously is the FMM and real-time prices often moved up by an order of magnitude between intervals. And what happened, as a result of that analysis, and on this slide, you can see some of the causes and effects of those unexpected prices. They've been identified by the ISO and the MSC and the DMM and others. But I just want to make clear the very first cause and effect, operator intervention. I'm not, it's not an allegation that the ISO operators are interfering or intervening in the market with malintent. In fact, they are doing exactly what they need to do, given the options that they have to maintain reliability. I suspect, and I fully anticipate, that those kind of operator interventions will continue, even if we do have scarcity pricing of some way. Hopefully it would be less and lower, but it would still be included. And while I don't have time to go into all of these or a raft of other observations, these inefficient outcomes as a result of the unexpected prices should be alarming to the observer. In fact, most other ISOs and RTOs have taken steps to address these issues and balance the incentives that participants face. And I think we should also. So I'm going to offer some guiding principles to scarcity pricing on the next slide, if we could move forward. And I guess it quickly became obvious to us in looking at this, and I think Dr. Harvey came to the same conclusion, that in order to manage the dynamic conditions of a real-time scarcity situation or tight supply condition, we need an early warning system. We need prices to signal appropriate actions before shortage, not just when we are curtailing load or running short of reserves. I think this gets a little bit to the comment of the caller from NV Energy that we want to see stepped and maybe known and predictable and smooth price increases as conditions tighten, rather than waiting until we're actually in a position of scarcity before we see prices change. But when we are actually curtailing load, we also must ensure that both the reserve and energy prices reflect that value of lost load. Now, earlier we talked about the potential for studying the value of lost load, and that may be an important element of how we move forward. Ideally, we'd avoid these discontinuous price changes, and we'd have, as I said, a predictable, smooth, transparent trajectory to prices as conditions tighten. I guess in the last bullet, like it or not, I think we're likely to remain interdependent in the West for the foreseeable future. We must price in ways that allow adjoining BAs to share in the bounty when there's excess, but also price so that we can attract imports. And when I say we, I mean every BA in the West, to the extent that it's necessary, attract imports when load demands it. So on the next slide, the paper comes up with some initial considerations, ideas, recommendations, seeds. So let's kind of chat through these a little bit more. Of course, all these would have to be completely vetted through a stakeholder process. And the very last one, Brad, is already limited, but we'll get to that in a second. The so as first element we think is that we suggest consideration of a mechanism that kind of builds on the reserve pricing in the ISO, but signals a reserve and energy shortage much further in advance and more forcefully. As we've talked about, this is called an operating reserve demand curve, or ORDC. Ideally, you trigger the steps in that demand curve to represent the cost of the actions of system operators. These actions that the ISO operators take are driven by operating procedures like the emergency procedure 4420, and that allows operators to use exceptional dispatch, request mutual assistance from other BAAs, turn on the state's emergency peaking resources, do all kinds of things well in advance or anticipation of a reserve shortage. But while you would want those steps to represent the cost of those actions, invariably, those actions are going to be very, very difficult to quantify. And so most designs, I think as Jeff Spire said, and I think it was discussed earlier, they admittedly use administrative pricing. And that administrative pricing sometimes can be, as it is with FRP, a probabilistic estimate of the reserve shortage occurring times the price that would occur at value of lost load or power balance constraint. So, we think that nonetheless, the top of that curve probably should represent the value of lost load for those reserves. So we think that that's probably one of the most important and probably most effective changes that the ISO could make. It's a modification to the existing reserve demand curve, but it would be much more aggressive and implemented much sooner in the process. And through the stakeholder process, we can try to decide what much sooner means. We obviously want it to apply when we truly anticipate scarcity. We don't want prices to rise administratively when there isn't a real shortage that's pending or likely. It kind of takes us to the second idea, which is here. And that second idea is that when we're in a position of reserve shortages, the price should rise all the way to the energy power balance constraint. And the rationale for that, which it doesn't now necessarily, and there's a lot of technical reasons built into the relative priorities of the penalty parameters, which if you have questions about that, I think Perry and Don are both on the call and they can answer. But essentially, I think in times of reserve shortage, the ISO will always curtail load in order to maintain reserves. And so the reserves, for 1 more megawatt of reserves, we would reduce load curtailment by 1 megawatt. And so it seems logical and reasonable that under those conditions, reserves should be priced at the power balance constraint, or admittedly, as I said, some estimate of the value of lost load. And then finally, again, if we are interrupting load, building on that second idea, if we are actually interrupting load, well, whether that's voluntary or involuntary, prices should remain at the cap for the duration of the interruption. We made changes that James highlighted earlier to RDRR, the Reliability Demand Response Program, to reflect this objective. We re-inject the load after RDRR is dispatched in order to make sure that prices don't crash. Well, we should do that for all types of load interruptions, including mandatory interruptions. The fourth item is what could truly be considered a bolt-on proposal, maybe the only one, where we suggest that we consider allowing real-time prices to exceed day-ahead prices when system conditions are tight. So if in fact the day-ahead market clears very tight, and we'd have to define what that means, we haven't, we allow real-time prices to rise higher than the day-ahead cap in order to create forward incentives for people to schedule their load and perform from a supply standpoint. It also creates some very interesting and I think productive incentives for virtual supplies. Finally, in a proposal that would be significant in closing the gap between FMM and RTD, we should consider reoptimizing ancillary services in each of those markets. A slight alternative to that, or maybe a helpful change to that also could be to resettle day-ahead positions with a real-time chargeback. So if you're unavailable on day-ahead, you buy back the real-time position. I don't believe that that's the condition right now. As was mentioned earlier, probably the nirvana of this approach is to procure ancillary services nodally. We readily admit that enhancement probably fails the soft touch objective that we established initially. And I think we understand that that would be a much longer term proposal to implement. So with all of these, the observations, the objectives, the proposals, they're all more fully described in the GDS Calpine collaborative paper. As I said, hopefully, James, you can post that on our behalf along with this presentation. And with that, I hope that this information is sufficient for the ISO to take a serious look in their issue paper at what pieces of this might make sense and what might be implementable in the fairly short term to bring us to prices during those tight supply conditions that encourage and reinforce the right kinds of behavior. James.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thanks again for providing this presentation, and to you and to GDS Associates for agreeing to making this report publicly available. The presentation for this presentation is on our stakeholder initiative webpage, but we'll make sure to include a link to the report as well. Excellent. Thank you, James. Thank you. So I don't have any clarifying questions or comments, so we can go ahead and open it up. We got about 10 minutes. If stakeholders have any questions for Mark or any comments, we'll start with the phone.
Okay, we'll move to Kelsey.
Hi, this is Kelsey Martinez from ENM. It seems to me, and I don't know much about this subject yet, but that the past two topics are related or could be related. So I'm interested on anyone's thoughts on if fixing the fast start pricing issue might have a positive effect on the scarcity pricing.
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I think there would be some interactions, and Jeff can certainly respond too if he can raise his hand. But I think that the peaker pricing issue occurs ubiquitously when those peakers are run, not necessarily or only during these very tight supply conditions. I also think that the peaker pricing could very well affect not only the real-time prices here. This stuff mostly is for 5% of the load, but it creates a very important price signal, which is why we're focused on it. But the peaker pricing would affect virtually day-ahead and real-time markets, whereas, as I said, this is just really focused on those real-time markets.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Question from Michelle.
Hey, this is Michelle at the CPUC. I have a couple of questions. Let's see. I think you said that CAISO will curtail load to maintain minimum operating reserves. Is that the case in all circumstances? Because I've read reports from other ISOs where they actually do dip into reserves. Are you saying zero? They won't dip into them at all?
Well, I'll let the ISO respond to that directly. It's my understanding that in order to preserve the minimum operating reserves necessary to meet the WECC and NERC requirements, they will actually arm load, and if the reserves drop, they will curtail load in order to replenish their reserves.
I thought it was like if you couldn't return in a certain amount of time, but okay, so that's one question. And then regarding RDRR, are you saying that we're going to keep the high prices even though we're using demand response? So we call the demand response to reduce load, and potentially that could do the trick, but you're saying we should keep the high prices?
Well, the change, and again, I'll defer to the ISO, but the change that was made in the summer enhancements proposal was that when RDRR is dispatched, what was happening, Michelle, was that the prices would crash, which then didn't encourage additional supply, didn't reasonably compensate the resources that were running for the reliability value. So the ISO made a proposal that when RDRR is dispatched, they would re-inject demand into the load curve in order to make sure that prices did not crash. James or Brad or somebody, did I get that right?
Okay, I guess I didn't know that. I know that they did it with arming load, but I didn't know that they were doing it for RDRR as well. Is that right? I mean, because part of the settlement agreement for RDRR was that it was supposed to mitigate scarcity pricing, not create it, right?
Yeah, so there have been some recent developments related to the RDRR dispatch issue that's a little bit different from the market enhancements for summer 2021 readiness, where there was this recent RDRR dispatch enhancements initiative. I'm not sure the exact name for it. And so in that proposal, it unwound a little bit of the proposal for market for summer 2021 readiness, where we had proposed that RDRs were going to be dispatchable from their PMIN to zero, which essentially allows them to be marginal in the optimization and set the price. And that had been walked back a little bit in the RDR enhancements proposal.
Okay.
I don't know if anyone else wants to add more context, but that's from a high level. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I don't see any more questions in queue, so thanks again, Mark, for your time. We'll move on to our next speaker, and we'll aim for 11:25, which is 30 minutes, to conclude the presentation and the questions and comments at the end. So we'll bring out our next speaker.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thanks for having me. I'm Brian Bartholomew from Rev Renewables. We operate close to 0.5 gigawatt of energy storage in California. Been operating batteries in the CAISO markets since 2018. And we wanted to focus today on two issues that we think are affecting energy storage relatively strongly, support all the other great pricing points that the other presenters are or have raised and will raise in the following presentation. And one point that just at a high level, just setting the stage for all this, like Jeff was saying, in the long run and why we should really all care about these prices and these markets working correctly, is because it all eventually does feed into decisions to build or retire new or old plants. So for us, it'd be building energy storage. And so, can cover up some of these costs and issues in the short term, but ultimately just makes it harder to make the case for building new projects, which we all want. All right, let's jump into it. Sorry, so I wouldn't even look at this slide. This is just a brutal, massive text. So can maybe reread it later. with some glasses. So the first issue I want to talk about today, which James did a good job of describing in his introductory presentation, is the interaction between two things. So one is that CAISO dispatches resources over a horizon of advisory prices in the real-time market. So looking ahead across 13 intervals, but you're only financially settled and paid based on what happens in the binding interval. So that's the price that prints and that CAISO posts publicly. And this works really well for your traditional fossil generators that need some warning to ramp up and down. It really doesn't work well with batteries. Why? Because what this system does is, say a resource is potentially going to run out of energy in this look-ahead period. This algorithm, it's looking out across this advisory price forecast, and it might see really high prices ahead. And so what this algorithm will do, it'll charge you outside of your bid curve based on these advisory prices that might not and typically don't actually materialize. So in this example, you're getting charged way outside your bid curve, way above your costs in anticipation of revenues that never actually materialize. On the flip side, another issue we see is that, say your battery is full and you're going into the evening peak in CAISO, and you really don't want to discharge at anything except for very high prices. This algorithm is looking ahead and seeing that prices are going to dip at the end of its advisory price forecast. You can sometimes get discharged, again, outside of your bid curve, emptying the resource in anticipation of charging benefits that you never actually get because the advisory price forecast is not accurate. And what really makes this an issue from the resource perspective is that there isn't any kind of bid cost recovery for this, right? The way bid cost recovery works is that you have to lose out over an entire day. So there can be times when, say you're supposed to have a high six-figure settlement on the day, your resource had all this energy in the tank, ready to serve load in a really tight period. You get jerked around outside your bid curve, outside your actual costs because of how these advisory prices are taken into account. You can end up with, a single-digit dollar amount. And because you didn't, quote unquote, lose money across the entire day, you're not eligible for bid cost recovery. It's kind of abstract and tough to wrap the mind around. So if we can just flip to the next slide, have an example of this in action. So you can just look at this table here. And what we've got here in the first column is just 5-minute intervals by timestamp for a recent example of this in action. The second column is the real-time rotational marginal price or plant. The third column is the plant dispatch operating target. So positive numbers mean that's what it was told to discharge. Negative numbers means that what it was told to charge. And on the right is just how much energy is in the plant. And it's really only there for the purposes of saying that there was enough energy in the plant to keep discharging. And so if you look at this, something that'll catch your eye immediately, if you look towards the 840 to 850 period, you notice these are really, really high prices. The battery still has energy in the tank. If you look at 840, for instance, the battery is getting charged over 200 megawatts at over $600 per megawatt hour. In this hour, we had bids to charge only at prices under $8 per megawatt hour. So we are over $600 per megawatt hour outside of our bid stack. We are, 400 plus megawatts in the wrong direction relative to our bid stack. We are paying thousands of dollars to charge, and there's no compensation for it. And obviously from the grid operator perspective, just looking at this, it's on its face not correct, right? You don't want your energy storage fleet charging at these really high prices. So that's the first issue that we wanted to highlight. If we can jump on to the second one. So again, apologies for just the wall of text, but the essence of this problem is how the flexible ramp, and particularly the flexible ramp up product, is or isn't really co-optimized with energy in the 15-minute market. And so the way that the system's operating right now is that if you get a flexible ramp up award, you're actually locked into that for the following interval as well. So, you know, the flexible ramp up and energy optimization happens for one interval, but then you are locked into that flexible ramp up award for the following interval, regardless of what the flexible ramp up price is, regardless of what the energy price is. And so just an example of this in practice. So we've got the details from a CD ticket that we submitted on the right. So here, the FMM energy price is $291 per megawatt hour. This is by far the highest price of the day in this instance. The flexible ramp up price in the interval is $0 per megawatt. And because in the prior interval we had a flex ramp up award, we get 0 megawatt hours of energy during this extremely high priced interval. And again, so financial impact to the resource, and then from the grid operator perspective, it's inefficiently preventing our resource from, you know, preserving energy and reducing prices in this really high price period. Just on its face, right? You can look at this and it doesn't make sense. It's not desirable from anybody's perspective that a resource is being shunted to a product that's priced at $0 instead of one that's priced at, you know, $290 per megawatt hour. And again, about to wrap up, but just one more thing to keep in mind, and something that makes me very nervous just on the market operations side and how we see these issues playing out in practice, is that we sell day-ahead energy in CAISO, right? We want to be there when conditions are tight, and these issues in the real-time market prevent us from physically and financially backing those awards and being able to really be there when the CAISO needs us most. I think that's all I had. Can open it up for questions.
Thanks, Brian. And again, thank you for taking the time to present today and for putting together the presentation. The presentation is available on the CAISO Stakeholder Initiative webpage if anybody is interested in going back and reviewing the presentations. And also a few of the presentations like this one on this slide provide some external links. So if you're curious what you'll find when you click those links, you can find out on the initiative webpage. I don't have any questions or comments. If anybody on the ISO team has any questions or comments, feel free. Otherwise, we have one question in the queue.
Hey, this is Gabe Murtaugh from California ISO. On, I think it's the previous slide, you've got the example where the storage resource is dispatched a charge at a high price. Do you, and I know we've talked about potential solutions in other venues, but do you have anything specifically that you'd like the ISO to consider to address this within the scope of this policy?
Yeah, thanks, Gabe, and thanks for your patience working with us on this. The reason we thought would be relevant here, right? We've talked about, you know, big cost recovery, all that, but the reason we really wanted to focus on it from a pricing perspective is just due to the inaccuracy and the opacity of the advisory prices. So as you guys have mentioned before, you know, MIO and advisory price, or multi-interval optimization and advisory pricing, is something that really is at the heart of the real-time market engine. So, you know, things we've floated before with, you know, some form of bid cost recovery for operations outside your bid curve where you're losing money due to these inaccurate advisory price forecasts. But more than that, we're not looking to claw back stuff from what happened in the past. We really want this just to work going forward. And like James mentioned, potentially weighting advisory pricing that's closer to the binding interval, right? Stuff off in the future probably has a greater band of uncertainty around it. So it could be nice to see if those intervals are weighted less. Another potential solution, and other folks have commented, just the opacity of the advisory prices. We don't even really know what they look like unless we can get a kind of bespoke explanation from CAISO. We really only see it in kind of wacky out-of-merit dispatch, and we're getting charged at high prices like this. It tells us, all right, the advisory price forecast was very wrong. Finally, another avenue, which again would be hard and kind of defer the technical experts at CAISO, would be just not using this multi-interval optimization for energy storage, right? We totally get that it's really valuable for slower ramping fossil plants. A battery can be full power charge, full power discharge, almost instantaneously. There's no physical constraint there. So we don't get any benefits from multi-interval optimization and the use of these advisory prices. We just really see the pain of it when those forecasts are inaccurate and we get jerked around.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Is Rev currently advocating for one of those potential solutions more than others, or are you just thinking that you'd like the ISO to explore maybe a handful of these solutions and start to think about it from there?
Yeah, so I mean, in a world where we're starting from scratch, right, and we weren't inheriting this multi-interval optimization, it would make sense just to dispatch energy storage resources on the binding interval prices. They don't have any ramping constraints that other generators have. They don't really get anything out of this optimization. But as do have this big traditional market engine. And so I think, floated these things, but it's really, the CAISO has a much better understanding of the technical cost of these, much more than we do.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Kate.
Let's take Perry Servideo on the phone.
Hey, this is Perry Servideo, GDS Associates. Thanks for taking my call. This is the exact slide I wanted to be on also, so the question fits. Looking at this is clearly an issue. This is an undesirable result to have the battery, discharging at such high price times, and then locking in those losses later on. What I wanted to ask though was, I suspect that the causes of this are much more complex than we're thinking right now. And I just wanted to ask if the CAISO has thoroughly diagnosed this problem before trying to figure out ways to change the market to work around this. And if they have thoroughly diagnosed it, I'm hoping they could maybe share that if this is included in the issue paper that's coming up.
Yeah, Perry. We've talked at pretty great lengths with Rev Renewables and with other storage resource operators on the grid about this, these specific issues and issues like these. And I think Brian did a really nice job characterizing how something like this could potentially happen, and how we sometimes see the markets working on the ISO side. You've got some anticipated prices in your advisory window in the real-time market, and those prices could suggest that a storage resource either charges or discharges, in this case it's charging, now, so that it can be prepared and ready to go for intervals later and high prices later. but those high prices never materialized, even though they were anticipated in the advisory intervals when the interval that you're actually charging is binding. Guillermo did a very detailed presentation on this at, I believe, the October, I'm trying to think, the October meeting for the Market Surveillance Committee. So there is some information on these kinds of situations and frequencies that we're seeing this sort of thing happen with storage resources in our markets. So we have done some digging and presented some data on this. You know, I think in light of these comments and sort of where we're heading in this policy, we are likely to, you know, think hard about the solution that Rev is advocating for here and other potential solutions that might help to address this problem. But I think, you know, we agree with what you're saying, Perry, and what Rev is saying. This doesn't seem like a very good outcome, but that doesn't necessarily mean we should completely get rid of our multi-interval optimization, because we do know that the multi-interval optimization does help when it anticipates prices, advisory prices, in the future, and those prices are right, which is certainly more often than not. So it's a delicate balancing act we need to think about as we move forward.
Thanks for that, Gabe. That was where I was going. And then I would just add, you know, not to prolong the topic, but I'll go back and review Guillermo's information. Just flagging how often this happens is a good look. I guess what I was after was, you know, perhaps actually go into this particular day and this particular time frame and rerun this thing and see what and have the optimization spit out what the advisory prices are over the next 60 minutes and actually diagnose it to decide, yes, that is actually exactly what happened in this instance. That's kind of what did the CAISO take any of those sort of steps? You know, I'll just reiterate, you could start talking about solutions all you want, but it'd be very helpful to inform those solutions to know exactly why this is occurring at the end of hour 8. And I've seen it sometimes at the end of hour 7 in the mornings.
Yeah, we did do that analysis on some specific examples, and we provided some of that in that link that Brenda just shared for that MSC meeting.
Thanks, Gabe.
Okay, we can move on to the next question.
Hi, Gabe, and thanks to Rev Renewables for a really excellent presentation here. This is Elvis Svoboda from PG&E. I just wanted to sort of understand the option because it seems more compelling to me now than it did originally. The idea is that essentially the battery would only be seen as a within-hour bid for charging and discharging, and then based on state of charge, the only consideration would be whether the bids were feasible to the current state of charge, as opposed to looking at any forward arbitrages. Is that correct? Person from Rev Renewables, whose name I've forgotten.
Yeah, this is Brian, and yeah, I mean, we get there's all this, you know, the technical inheritance, but yes, we would definitely prefer to only be dispatched on the binding interval prices, just because, I mean, if you look at this example here, right, we just can't control what the resource is going to do if we get awards outside of a bid curve.
Right. But you wouldn't see any forward value other than your bid itself. There would be no forward value, say, from charging. So if you bid to charge and it's in the money, and you have ability to charge, they will charge in that period, essentially, because they wouldn't see, not only would they not see the arbitrage, but potentially they'd also miss the fact that the disadvantage of this would be that if you were charging in the day ahead market awards during the interval, it wouldn't see that either, right? So you'd have some potential losses, but basically you're converting it to something a lot more like what the hybrid model actually would be doing in real time, which is just dispatching on a bid curve.
Yeah, and just for other context too, and you know, folks were asking about, you know, how often are the advisory prices wrong? We we wouldn't spend so much time on this, or yeah, we wouldn't even be talking about it at all if this multi-interval optimization was giving us good results, right? Like if we were coming in empty to this period and it had charged us up in hour ending 7, so we could have even more energy in hour ending 8, so we had more energy in the tank going into hour ending 9. This slide would not exist. We'd be really happy with it.
Right.
But we tend to see the inaccurate advisory prices, when there's the most volatility in the system, right? Because that's when predicting prices is hardest.
Right. It's basically poor forecasting of the, even aside from whether if there's a forecast of value in those later hours, it's not accurate.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate the. I think I do think your solution has more. If that problem can't be resolved, which in some ways you'd have to say it's always going to exist to some extent, then maybe that's at least an option that should be provided. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. So we will move on to Callie Wells from Gridwell Consulting, and we will aim for 11:48 to conclude the presentation, and then we might be able to squeeze in a couple extra comments or questions in those last couple minutes about the entire, all of the presentations today. So let's pass it over to Callie.
Hi, James. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm Callie Wells. I'm a co-founder and senior partner at Gridwell Consulting, and we are here today on behalf of the Western Power Trading Forum. So the Western Power Trading Forum, or WPTF, for those of you unfamiliar with it, is a broad-based industry organization that advocates for competitive markets and transparent market rules throughout the Western Interconnect. So if you want to advance the slide, actually a couple ones is fine to the outline. There you go, perfect, thank you. So first we wanted to thank the CAISO for giving us this opportunity today to talk about the issues to potentially be included within scope of this effort. So we're going to start out with just a general discussion, what we view our current priorities are, and then we'll touch on a few key points on the other topics that have been raised as well, and then wrap up with some key takeaways for consideration. So you can go ahead and advance the slide, please. Thank you. So when it comes to price formation, obviously this topic and these discussions have been ongoing for several years now. And I think at this point in time, we want to recognize that there is a really unique opportunity in front of us. And that is really to kind of rethink price formation in general within the context of an EDAM market. So with that, we appreciate the CAISO being willing to take on a wide range and what sounds like a potentially long list of topics to be included in this effort. But naturally, that will call for the need to prioritize topics and potentially consider a phased approach on this effort. So when it comes to prioritizing topics, at this point in time, WPTF is asking that the CAISO first address the topics that are currently affecting reliability and efficient integration of storage resources. These issues are only going to be more important as we look forward to an EDAM paradigm. And that's scarcity pricing, multi-interval optimization, and out-of-market actions. At this point in time, the other two topics, start pricing and market power, we think might be better served in moving to a phase 2 effort, primarily because at this point in time, we think the first step to take in those topics is to really do some analysis so that we can better evaluate their need and potential impact to the market. So I was encouraged to see Jeff's slides that they've actually started down that path, and I think it's that kind of analysis, especially with fast start pricing, that we would like to see the CAISO do as well, so we can kind of start wrapping our mind around what are the potential benefits there. Next slide. Right, so let's get into scarcity pricing. I'll try and keep this brief. There's a lot of conversations that have already gone on with scarcity pricing and share a lot of the same sentiments that have already been voiced. But price formation in general, especially during those stressed and scarce system conditions, are a fundamental element in any well-functioning market. Similar to what Mark noted from Calpine is, we don't believe that scarcity pricing should only occur once shortages start to exist, but rather it should be a gradually increasing price signal that really starts as soon as the system starts to near those scarcity conditions, and obviously once, if it does hit shortage conditions, continue through that as well. This will, incent more supply as soon as the market starts to get into those stress system conditions. So we understand, and we've heard it already on this call, that maybe the initial reaction to high prices in general is somewhat negative, but really price formation in terms of getting those accurate prices, both when they should be appropriately high and when they shouldn't be appropriately high, is really important. And it provides benefits to the market as a whole, from the load side to the supplier side, when we can get those strong scarcity signals correct when it's appropriate. So strong scarcity signals, we've heard this a little bit already. The benefit it does provide to the LSCs, it does provide benefit in terms of reliability, and that's a really key point here. You do get an incentive for supply that clears the day-ahead market. There's a stronger incentive for them to actually show up in real time. All those speculative import supply that we've been talking about for a couple of years now, if you have scarcity pricing and really strong signals in the real-time market, they're now exposed to a higher or more significant risk of being exposed to higher real-time prices. So that provides that incentive for them to actually show up in real time. But in addition to that, it also incents additional supply to show up in real time that maybe wasn't made available in the day-ahead market. And in this one, it's really important, especially as we're competing for limited supply with the rest of the Western Interconnect and even between EDAM BAAs. So when you have all these entities or BAAs together competing for the same limited amount of energy that might be left during these tight supply conditions, it really is that price signal that tells the market and market participants where the energy is needed the most. And obviously, from the supplier perspective, they do benefit as well because they're more adequately compensated for being available to the market when they're actually most needed by the system. So at the end of the day, what we really see are significant benefits to ensuring that our market is able to send out the appropriate and strong price signals as soon as it starts to near those scarcity conditions. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we do recognize today, and as it's already been noted in Calpine's slides, that the CAISO does have some scarcity pricing mechanisms in place today. But unfortunately, the way they're currently structured does not always allow for the proper price formation to occur, especially during those stress system conditions. And there's also a couple other features that we'll talk about a little bit that actually might result in diluting or suppressing the price signals. So we'll start with AS scarcity design. So currently, the CAISO has their scarcity pricing mechanism implemented through ancillary services. So, as ancillary services start to experience shortage conditions, the AS prices will increase. It's based, the amount of the price that it increases by is based on the type, location, and magnitude of the shortage. There's a very technical discussion on exactly how to set those different penalty prices, and it's all in the BPM, but the idea is prices will continue to increase as the severity of that shortage increases as well. The idea being that because AS is co-optimized with energy, when the AS prices start to reflect these shortage conditions, the energy prices will too, but that's not always the case. The energy price actually may or may not reflect high AS prices, even though AS is short. It really does depend on a couple technical details, but I think the key one to keep in mind is that the AS is only co-optimized in the day ahead in the 15-minute market. It is not in the 5-minute market. So what this means is that even though we're short AS reserves, whether that's spinning reserves, non-spin, or regulation, there's no ability for that scarcity signal to show up in the 5-minute energy prices. And I think the poster child example of this is August of 2020. I was actually sitting at home and all of a sudden my power goes out, and yet 5-minute prices I think were hovering around $100. So there's a clear disconnect there. The 15-minute prices did reflect the scarcity, but the 5-minute prices did not. So I think that there's some potential enhancements, or maybe looking at the operating reserve demand curve that can help address some of these issues that we're seeing with the way the AS scarcity design is currently functioning in our market. So now if we move on to the power balance constraint. Oh no, sorry, I didn't mean to advance slides. yeah, second bullet here. So the power balance constraint, the penalty price that is used is set to the energy bid cap. So when we're short energy, the idea is that that constraint will be relaxed and the energy prices will be based on the penalty price or the energy bid cap. You know, the PVC constraint is currently at $1,000 under most conditions. I know there's a slight nuance there when the energy bid cap is set to $2,000. I think James kind of touched on this a little bit already. We'll get into that, but for now, let's just focus on the conditions where, you know, the energy bid cap is, you know, at $1,000. So the power balance constraint penalty price is also at $1,000. So the key here is because the penalty price when we're short energy is set at the same level as the bid cap, from a price signal perspective, there is no way to discern today if prices are set simply because the market is economically dispatching resources that have $1,000 bids, and there still might be ample supply left in the market, or the market is actually short energy and we're seeing high prices because of that. So I know prices can and do go above $1,000. So when I'm talking, you know, the scarcity signal through the power balance constraint penalty price, I'm really referring to the impact it has on the energy component of the LMPs, just for clarification. But I think this goes back to the point that when the market starts nearing those scarcity conditions, it needs to be able to send some sort of signal that allows participants to be able to differentiate between when the market is just dispatching into those higher economic bids versus we're really nearing stress system conditions, we need to incent more supply. So today, there's no way to discern the difference between those two. And we think that that's a really important signal that can be sent out to the market. Okay, so now let's talk about when the power balance constraint and the energy bid cap is at that $2,000 price. So the CAISO went through FERC Order 831 efforts, and part of that design included what's referred to as a shortage threshold. So essentially, whenever our system, and specifically for the CAISO BA, I believe the final value for the shortage threshold was 210 megawatts, 214 megawatts. But essentially what that element does is it allows our system to actually be short energy over 200 megawatts, and the prices will still be based on the last economic offer that was cleared, which may or may not even be $2,000. It might be $1,100. So in our minds, it shouldn't matter if we're short 1 megawatt or 200 megawatts, 500 megawatts. The prices need to be able to reflect the fact that we're out of supply and we've kind of gone away from dispatching energy out of our supply stack. So again, another element of the current design that we think can use some attention in terms of really strengthening that price signal that's sent out as we enter into those stress system conditions. Okay, so kind of switching gears slightly a little bit here, rec biasing. We recognize this is a form of operator intervention or out-of-market action, whatever nomenclature you want to use. But we did want to call this one out specifically just because of the significant impact it has on our market, arguably on a day-to-day basis. You know, and the CAISO has made efforts to try and reduce the amount of rec biasing, but really we have yet to see a really noticeable impact. When operators bias rec, when they increase the load that's used in the rec process, ultimately what that ends up doing is it ends up creating additional supply that's available in the real-time market that did not clear the day-ahead market. And whenever you increase supply in one market relative to what cleared in another, you're going to end up with lower prices. Again, we do understand that operators are going to want and need the ability to review the results coming out of the day-ahead market, and they should have tools at their disposal to make adjustments as necessary for reliability reasons. So we think that rec biasing, we need to find a way to really limit the amount of rec biasing that's occurring, get those out-of-market actions into the market so that prices can have more proper price formation, and really trying to address that systematic divergence that we're seeing today between the day-ahead and the real-time prices. So again, rec biasing, we did want to call that out separately, I think primarily because this is not just something that affects price formation during stress system conditions. It's actually something that's affecting price formation probably on a daily basis. And also the last point on the rec biasing is, if we understand operators are going to need some tools at their disposal. So providing more transparency around when rec biasing occurs and for what reasons, when it is, really limited to only certain system conditions or emergency conditions where they can actually adjust the rec forecast would be useful. And lastly here, there are obviously other out-of-market actions or operator intervention that can take place that also suppress the price signals. And typically, a lot of these actions occur to prevent emergency conditions, or they occur when we're already in emergency conditions and operators are trying to get our system back to, out of that emergency conditions back to normal operating conditions. A lot of these actions we've heard, ultimately could have the effect of reducing the load that's used in the real-time market. And when you reduce load that's used, they're cleared in the real-time market. Again, it just has the natural effect of lowering prices. But when they're taking these actions to prevent emergency conditions from occurring, or when we're in emergency conditions, the last thing you want to be doing is suppressing prices. It's those exact conditions that we really need that strong scarcity signal to be sent out to the market. So again, just the key point here is really getting those out-of-market actions into the market as much as possible when it comes to price formation. Okay, we want to move to the next slide. And I'll keep these brief, just looking at the time here. Multi-interval optimization, we just heard a really great presentation from Rev Renewables. Here again, we presented this slide or something very similar to this in the latest storage workshop, but we did want to reiterate it here just because we appreciate the CAISO bringing this specific issue into the price formation effort. I won't spend much time because we just kind of had a whole presentation on this, but we really do believe that trying to do a deep dive into what is exactly driving the differences between the advisory and binding prices would be extremely useful. We understand that that will probably take a little bit of time to really kind of figure out what's going on there and then consider some enhancements that that we can do to help bring those binding advisory prices together. I think the more we can address that separation, the better. But while that effort is going on, there is a short-term solution that we think the CAISO should really strongly consider, and that's just provide more transparency on what those advisory prices are. I think that the more information market participants that are bidding these resources in on a day-to-day basis can see what those advisory prices are, they'll gain confidence in their ability to maybe predict those prices, and then they can use that to inform their bidding strategy. So that is, one potential short-term solution that the CAISO can do today while they endeavor doing kind of this deeper dive into what is driving the differences between the binding and advisory prices for storage resources. Next slide, please. Okay, fast start pricing. So here, this is one where we agree that theoretically speaking, fast start pricing can improve price formation. To the extent there are resources out there today that should be setting that marginal price, but because of the way the market works is not, that's obviously a price formation issue. Practically speaking, at this point in time, we're not quite sure what the benefit, what the potential magnitude of benefits are, not only in the CAISO BA, but also when we're looking to EDAM. The CAISO did do some analysis back in, I think it was 2017, 2018 on fast start pricing and the potential benefits it can have in the CAISO BAA. So at this point, we're asking for that analysis to be updated. Our resource mix has clearly changed. We're looking at an EDAM market. So the first step for this one, I think for us to kind of really wrap our minds around what are the potential benefits that we can actually get from the fast start pricing mechanism is to do some analysis. Next step, or next slide, please. Okay, system market power mitigation. So I appreciate Michelle's question at the very beginning of the stakeholder call. I too was not quite clear as to what the CAISO was originally thinking for this effort, whether it's just changes to local market power mitigation or actually system market power mitigation. But through conversations with the EDAM working group, it did take me back to those conversations we were having a couple of years ago on system market power mitigation. So we did want to speak to that topic here. And really, again, just to reiterate, WPTF supports competitive markets, and we support, and with that, we obviously support protecting markets against the ability of market power to be exerted. Absent the ability for market power to be exerted, though, we're concerned that implementing a mitigation mechanism when market power does not exist introduces significant risk in terms of those type 1 errors. So those type 1 errors is mitigating energy offers when market power doesn't actually exist. And when you look at when those type 1 errors are more likely to occur, if you were to go down a similar design that was discussed, I think 18 months or 2 months ago for system market power, those errors are more likely to occur when we're in stressed system conditions. So really, if you're mitigating for market power that does not exist in those tight supply conditions, you're suppressing the price signal that really, in situations where you really need that scarcity signal to be sent out. You know, the CAISO did some analysis and to look at how frequently the system is considered uncompetitive or having uncompetitive conditions on a system-wide level to evaluate, you know, what is the ability, or is there even system market power today that we should be concerned about. When they did that analysis, there was no evidence that there was the ability for system market power to even be exerted. And when we think about, you know, is there the ability to actually exert market power in the system, there's three things that we think of as, do those uncompetitive conditions exist in a predictable manner? Are they persistent, and are they profitable? And based on the analysis, that was not the case. And now we're looking at potentially an extended day-ahead market where we're going to have even more supply on the system. So at this point in time, we're strongly encouraging the CAISO to defer consideration of system market power. We think it introduces significant risk, especially when there's no evidence that the ability to exert system market power even exists, and especially absent any strong scarcity pricing mechanism. The last thing you want to be doing is suppressing market prices during those stress system conditions if you do not have a robust scarcity pricing mechanism in place. Okay, last slide, and I will wrap it up. Okay, so just kind of to wrap everything up here again, obviously we strongly encourage the CAISO to look into developing a very robust scarcity pricing mechanism that really allows prices, again, to rise above those economic offers, starting as soon as the system starts to near those scarcity conditions. So don't wait until we're out, you know, we're in shortage conditions, but allow that signal to start sooner than that. They should really focus on ways to have those scarcity conditions reflected in all products, so in energy and AS, in all conditions and in all markets, day ahead, 15 and 5-minute market. So with that, and given kind of everything that we've heard today from the other presenters as well, at this point in time, you know, really prioritize the issues with the existing market design that will benefit reliability and the efficient integration of storage resources. Do some analysis on the benefits of fast start pricing so we can really, you know, see what the trade-offs are if we were to go down that path. And at this point in time, defer system market power. And that is it. Thank you.
Thanks, Callie. I just wanted to comment on something that was interesting that was brought up regarding the price formation issues caused by load biasing, and the rec biasing was one that was in particularly talked about, but you know, arguably all types of load biasing or as an example, as a subset of an out-of-market action that can lead to price formation issues, I think is important to talk about, and I agree. I think solutions to those, to the root causes of what are causing the biasing, either in real time or in the day or in rec, are trying to be addressed in other initiatives. So it's not likely that we will, you know, we will consider and scope anything particular to solve those issues, but there certainly should be harmony among those things, and there may be opportunities like the short-term enhancements that you described about, you know, how we could provide more data transparency about the reason why load biasing is occurring, et cetera. So I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah, I appreciate it to the extent, and I know those conversations on the rec biasing are probably most happening in the day-ahead market enhancements, but I think to the extent those conversations continue to happen to kind of bring them into this effort as well, so we can continue to connect the dots there would be useful.
Right. Yeah, because it's something that actually doesn't get emphasized much about, you know, excessive commitment, let's just say excessive commitments can cause suppression of real-time prices. Hold on, I don't know if my AirPods died. Switch to my speakerphone. But yeah, so that's not something that we comment on much, and it is sort of a price formation issue that we should think about holistically. We have two questions in queue, and I want to leave about five, maybe 7 minutes to the questions for Callie, and then if we have some time at the end, I'd like to see if some of the people that we skipped over in the queue still have questions. So let's go to Seth.
Thank you. It's not more of a question, it's just an observation that just to add something about this RUC biasing. I know that you're looking at day-ahead market enhancements, but you made the point earlier that you want to see efficient virtual bidding behavior. And, you know, this really does tie into the RUC biasing, and let me explain. When you perform these RUCs, they actually create a lot of uplift costs that then distort the ability for virtuals to converge the market. So I would implore you that if you're serious about having efficient virtual bidding behavior, that you take care of that as soon as possible, because with those kinds of uplift numbers that we see as virtual bidders, it's going to be impossible to converge the market efficiently when those uplift costs are so high and they're being assigned to those that are trying to converge the market. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Seth. Let's move to Michelle.
Hey, Michelle Keeter from the CPC. I just want to address that last point, which is that, you know, part of the reason that we do the RUC biasing is because we know that the exports are supported by advisory EIM imports. And so if you want to address that issue, you also have to address this idea of HASP and advisory EIM imports supporting exports, for which you need more resources to support those exports. So it seems like it's sort of it's a ball that needs to be unwound. I also just wanted to ask, you know, one of the issues that you came to, you're discussing is this idea of scarcity pricing for near scarce conditions. And I'm just wondering, do you think of RDRR as an in-market resource or as an out-of-market resource?
That question for me, Michelle, or more James? Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
For me?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely an in-market resource, but I guess just to be clear what I was saying in terms of allowing a strong scarcity signal as soon as we start to enter into those stress system conditions is actually to have a signal that's above the economic offers. Obviously, there's a bid cap of $1,000, so whether that's an operating reserve demand curve, you know, that's in the Calpine GDS Associates paper, but allow some way to differentiate between, okay, we are actually getting towards the end of our supply stack, and we need to provide some sort of incentive for additional supply to show up. So yes, I would say those are in market because now they can actually set the prices, but more, we need a stronger signal.
Yeah, so I just want to say that I think what needs to be in this discussion is how we dispatch RDRR. Because RDRR doesn't get activated until an EEA2, which means you've already lost the operators. So, you know, if you want to send the right signals, you want to send it both to supply and demand resources, but we're not sending it to the demand side resources. So I think that's an important aspect of this, right? If we want to treat supply and demand similarly during those stress system conditions, we really have to think about how we activate RDRR, which I've been arguing for quite some time. So right now, if it's only activated in EEA2, that means it's not included in the resource sufficiency test, which means that we fail it, which means we lose access to the imports that are, support load and exports. So to me, if we want to go down this path, we really have to think of RDRR and figure out how to give it the same, treat it equally. So thanks for that. That was it for right now. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. And again, I sort of brought up the issue about, or Callie's comment about the load biasing, not so much to stress, really to stress the point that those types of solutions are being considered in other initiatives, and we're not going to be able to wrap in all of those things into this initiative, but it is important as we're designing proposals for this initiative to consider holistically the effects of load biasing, and so that was kind of why I brought that up. Any other questions or comments for Callie?
We do have a couple more here. We'll go to Doug.
I'm sorry, actually my comment was following up on the earlier one.
Okay.
I had raised my hand earlier in the call. I could wait.
Yeah. Stay in queue, Doug,
okay.
And then we'll see if Josh, if his question is to Callie, we'll go to him first, and then we'll come back to you.
Great.
Okay, Josh.
Thank you, Josh Arnold, PG&E. James, this is actually more a response to one of the comments you made on Callie's presentation regarding the RUC biasing. And I know we've discussed this heavily under the day-ahead market enhancements, but really the only time that RUC biasing will affect the real-time market prices is if there's an overcommitment of binding commitment costs. So that would be long start resources that weren't awarded in the day ahead and would not have been awarded in the day ahead if the load had, if the system had cleared 100% of load using those resources in the combined day ahead market. So I think there's a bit of a boogeyman here with RUC biasing because it doesn't always impact real-time prices. It's only under really two conditions: excess commitment of long start resources, because those act as schedule blocks that can't be turned off, and also if the RUC biasing ends up buying more power than is needed in the real-time market, thereby having forcing buybacks. So long as RUC biasing is just increasing active liquidity in incremental energy, there is no suppression of real-time prices. It just gives us a larger liquid pool for the market to take advantage of. So I just want to make sure that we don't make it just a boogeyman of terrible outcomes. There are valid reasons for biasing. We've seen that from the operator's perspective, and it doesn't always impact on these things. So I just wanted to tighten that definition up a bit if we can. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Josh. Okay, so I had Doug Boccignoni, Petar Rastanovich, and then Daniel Calusi from FERC, who reached out to me separately to say he could not wait this long for his question. So, but Doug, you had a question on one of the earlier presentations. I don't know if Jeff Spires is still available to respond, so I don't know if your question is for Jeff or if it's a comment. So
sure, it's more of a, well, I have a comment as well. So I did want to first, this is Doug Boccignoni. I'm with Flynn Resource Consultants, and I represent the Bay Area Municipal Transmission Group. I want to support the point raised by Western early on the call about considering whether the integrated balancing authority area pricing concept continues to be appropriate in light of the EIM and EDAM. You know, the original justification for IBAA was that those particular balancing authority areas were integrated within the market footprint, and with the EIM and EDAM, you know, all of the resources in all of those BAAs are integrated in the market. So I think it's worth considering, you know, it does have an impact on price formation, and it seems to me it's no longer appropriate to have IBA pricing. So I wanted to put that out there. And then in terms of the energy GPS analysis that Jeff discussed, I'm curious as to whether the analysis considered the impact of congestion on the pricing. In other words, did it limit the propagation of the higher pricing that would occur from allowing the peakers to set the price? Did it, was that limited by constraints within the system external to CAISO and, between the BAAs and CAISO? And then just a comment, I think both Jeff raised the point that the owned resources in the third bullet point about the wholesale cost to load in CAISO. He pointed out that if there are owned resources of LSEs, that would lower that value. I think Michelle also pointed out that contracted resources would also lower the value. I'd say a third category of resources would be RMR resources that are on cost-based contracts, because the market revenues that they get also go back to the load-serving entities who fund those contracts.
Great questions, Doug. Jeff has just raised his hand, so let's turn to Jeff.
Thanks, Doug, for those comments and questions. It's Jeff Spires of PowerX. I think the question that you asked about whether Energy GPS considered congestion is in the analysis is a great question, and I think the short answer is yes, but of course this was an empirical analysis using historical data about what the actual dispatches were, and then attempting to evaluate based on those outcomes what the pricing impacts would be of having included the peakers in the price or not. And so Energy GPS attempted to evaluate the congestion patterns to avoid, essentially, as you're describing, extrapolating what might be a local dispatch in a constrained area to the broader region in a way that's not accurate. But at the same time, they don't have perfect information to be able to kind of recalculate the impacts across the area with precision. So certainly if we had more information, we could do that more granularly, but they were definitely considering those types of issues to try to make sure that the results they were getting were indicative of what they would think the broader impact to the prices would be in those areas.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. And I also support the request, if you could share the analysis more broadly. I think it would be really useful to see the methodology described and more information about the analysis. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug and Jeff. Okay, so I think that we can conclude. I don't see any other questions or comments in the chat or on the phone. So Brenda, I'll turn it back to you. You got a lot of slides to advance forward.
Looks like your device is on mute, Brenda.
From where? Can you double check on that?
Yes, you are now unmuted.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So we're going to go to the last few slides for today's meeting. Thank you everyone for participating at this workshop. The next steps are that the Price Formation Enhancement Initiative is available with presentations posted where we have separated each of those stakeholders as well for their presentations. So if you have any questions, feel free to look at that link. I did submit it through the chat, so if you need that link again, I'll send it again. The most recent reminder for us is that we plan to post the issue paper by the end of this month. We will make sure we let you know with a notice and other communications if something does come up, but that's the plan. And then lastly, the last slide I'd like to share with all is that we do have a stakeholder symposium coming up this end of the year on November 9th through 10th. This will be held at the Safe Credit Union Convention Center in downtown Sacramento. We do look forward to seeing all of you in person. As well, we'll offer this in WebEx form as well for many of these speaker opportunities. So please feel free to look at our information that we'll be posting soon. Registration will be posted around this month, so we'll send out a notice as well when registration is open, and we're opening up sponsorships as well. And then if you have any questions, send them to symposiumreg@kaizo.com. With that, I will go ahead and conclude this meeting a little bit for 3 minutes and give you guys that time. But we appreciate everyone's participation, and we look forward to your journey and price formation enhancement meeting. Thank you, everyone. And passing it back to Marvin to conclude this meeting.
Thank you. That concludes our conference. Thanks for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.